In the remote Ozark Mountains of Newton County, Arkansas, the landscape seemed to exist outside the reach of civilization. Between 1897 and 1899, 28 trappers disappeared without a trace, vanishing into the dense forests and steep cliffs that swallowed them whole. The region was covered in thick oak and hickory, mountains so steep that sunlight barely touched the valley floors, even at midday. Small settlements were scattered across the wilderness like forgotten islands, often no more than 3 or 4 families, separated by treacherous trails and days of travel. There were no telegraph lines to connect them, no railroads to bring law or trade, no sheriff's office nearby in case of trouble. A man could disappear in those mountains and never be found, claimed quietly by terrain that had taken countless lives since the first settlers arrived. The Civil War had destroyed what little infrastructure had existed, and by the 1890s, progress had barely touched these valleys. Families struggled to survive, finding in fur trapping one reliable source of income. Each autumn, men would venture into the remote valleys along the Buffalo River system, seeking beaver, mink, and otter, whose pelts could be traded for desperately needed money at small posts across Newton County. Amid this harsh and isolated landscape lived the Caldwell sisters, Mercy and Temperance, inheritors of a life carved out of stubborn remoteness. Their father, Josiah Caldwell, had been a moonshiner of some local note, operating a hidden still deep in a hollow 15 miles from the nearest settlement of Parthenon. When he died in a hunting accident in 1895, the sisters inherited the 160-acre homestead and continued his work, producing whiskey in the shadows of the mountains. The sisters were considered eccentric, but eccentricity in the Ozarks was unremarkable, and most neighbors paid little mind to their activities. In late 1896, traveling peddler James Whitmore encountered them during one of his rounds through the hills. He remembered the visit with a disquieting clarity. Their cabin appeared as if it had grown from the mountainside itself, surrounded by outbuildings and root cellars dug into the hill behind the main structure. Mercy, the older sister, conducted all business with Whitmore, while Temperance remained silent, observing with a piercing gaze that made the peddler eager to complete his trade and leave. Despite the sisters' apparent poverty, Whitmore noted the expensive fabrics and quality metal tools they purchased, goods beyond the means of typical moonshiners. He dismissed it at the time, attributing it to careful mountain thriftiness. Yet the sisters paid in silver coins and showed particular interest in buying heavy chains and metal hardware, which Mercy claimed were to secure livestock against bears and mountain lions. The first disappearances began the same year. In October 1897, trapper Robert Finch failed to return from a hunting trip along the Buffalo River. His family in Missouri waited through the winter, assuming he had extended his stay or gone further west. By spring, with no news, they filed a missing persons report in Harrison, Arkansas, but held little hope of resolution. Men vanished in these mountains regularly, victims of animal attacks, falls, exposure, or voluntary disappearances, and families learned to accept losses without answers. By the spring of 1899, 7 men had disappeared in the same general territory. All were experienced trappers, familiar with wilderness survival and the specific dangers of the Ozarks. Unlike typical vanishings, these men left no traces. No abandoned camps, no scattered tools, no remains to suggest accidents. It was as if they had ceased to exist the moment they entered this stretch of forest. Local authorities lacked the resources to conduct wide-ranging searches across 50 brutal square miles. Residents explained away the disappearances as mountain accidents, or men fleeing debts, family obligations, or personal trouble. Deputy Sheriff Ezra Thornton was not one to accept convenient explanations. At 42, he had spent nearly 15 years in law enforcement after returning from the Civil War with a limp that never fully healed. He had served as a scout and tracker for Union forces, learning to read terrain and human behavior alike. Now, He studied the accumulating missing person reports with a methodical eye. 7 experienced trappers all vanished within 18 months from the same area along the Buffalo River system. Statistically improbable, the disappearances troubled him. Accidents claimed lives, certainly, but these men were professionals who understood risks and precautions. Thornton spent weeks reviewing each case, interviewing families, and mapping last known locations. A pattern emerged, suggesting something beyond nature was at work. All trappers had entered the same remote territory, roughly 15 miles southeast of Parthenon. Local woodsmen avoided the area, though they could not articulate why beyond a vague sense of unease. Thornton learned that the land was dominated by the Caldwell homestead, where the sisters continued their father's moonshining operations. Most dismissed any connection. The sisters were strange, certainly, but eccentricity was common in the mountains, and no one believed 2 isolated women could be involved in the disappearance of capable men. In April 1899, Thornton made his first expedition into the area, guided by a local familiar with the treacherous trails to the Caldwell property. The journey took 2 days of hard travel through terrain that seemed designed to repel visitors. The guide explained that Josiah Caldwell had deliberately chosen the hollow for its isolation, ensuring his distilling operation remained undisturbed. When Thornton finally reached the homestead, he studied 2 women who seemed shaped by the harsh mountains themselves. Mercy Caldwell stood nearly 6 feet tall, her prematurely gray hair framing piercing blue eyes that met his gaze without flinching. Her younger sister, Temperance, remained silent throughout, observing him with patient intensity as though measuring a potential threat. Thornton presented himself carefully, explaining his investigation and inquiring about missing trappers. Mercy responded with calm cooperation, recalling encounters with trappers who occasionally sought supplies or whiskey at their home. She spoke with remarkable precision, remembering details of men she claimed to have met only briefly. When questioned about specific missing individuals, Mercy offered plausible explanations. One had planned to travel west to California, another faced personal troubles and sought a fresh start elsewhere. Several simply moved on to other hunting grounds. She delivered these stories with the casual cadence of scripture, as though the Bible formed the rhythm of her daily thought. Yet Thornton noticed troubling inconsistencies. Despite their modest, weathered clothing and the cabin showing signs of long use, high-quality tools and expensive fabrics were visible among the outbuildings. These purchases seemed unusual for women who survived on isolated moonshining. Thornton's instincts, honed from years of scouting and tracking, suggested that the homestead might hold secrets that the sisters were determined to keep. He noted the silence of Temperance, the precise recall of Mercy, and the tension that lingered around their property. The deputy's concern deepened as he observed the terrain surrounding the homestead. Hidden hollows, carved cellars, and intricate root cellars suggested labor far beyond what might be needed for simple moonshine production. Thornton left the property with more questions than answers, yet a growing conviction that something sinister had taken root beneath the Caldwell sisters' seemingly ordinary isolation. He could not ignore the mounting evidence or the strange pattern of disappearances that had drawn him to the mountains in the first place. The wilderness, once a place of survival and livelihood, now concealed horrors beyond imagining, and Thornton realized that uncovering the truth would demand every ounce of his skill, courage, and perseverance. Cabin's door was open, revealing a surprising abundance of supplies that seemed out of place given their circumstances. When he asked to inspect the property, Mercy agreed easily to show him the main cabin and nearby outbuildings, but carefully avoided the hillside behind the home, where several heavy wooden doors were embedded into the rock face. The breakthrough in the Caldwell case came less from careful detective work and more from a combination of desperate circumstance and extraordinary survival. On September 12, 1899, a man staggered into Harrison, Arkansas in the early hours. His clothes were torn and filthy, his body covered with infected wounds that suggested days crawling through the wilderness. He collapsed in the street outside Dr. Marcus Henderson's house, barely conscious and burning with fever. Recognizing the seriousness of his condition, the doctor immediately had him carried inside for care. The stranger's injuries included deep cuts on his wrists and ankles, consistent with restraints, severe malnutrition pointing to prolonged captivity, and infected leg wounds likely sustained during a frantic escape over rocky terrain and through dense undergrowth. As Dr. Henderson worked to stabilize him, the man drifted in and out of feverish consciousness, speaking in fragments the doctor initially dismissed as delirium, but certain words repeated with alarming consistency: the breeding room, the sisters' cellar, chains in the dark, other men screaming. Henderson realized that, whether fevered or real, these fragments pointed to something far beyond a hunting accident or misadventure in the woods. He sent for Deputy Thornton at once and began recording everything his patient said while lucid. Over the next 3 days, as infection ravaged the man's weakened body, a terrifying story unfolded, carefully documented in Dr. Henderson's journal. The man identified himself as Samuel Morrison, a 29-year-old trapper from Tennessee who had come to Arkansas in early 1899 in search of better hunting territory. In late August, he had encountered the Caldwell sisters while scouting trap lines near their property. Mercy had invited him to their cabin, offering to trade moonshine for information on good hunting areas. Morrison accepted, seeing the opportunity as a potentially valuable supply relationship for the long winter. He recalled drinking from a cup Mercy provided, and then nothing until he awoke in total darkness, wrists and ankles shackled with heavy chains anchored into bedrock. He was not alone. Other men were confined in the underground chamber, some barely coherent from what Morrison estimated must have been months of captivity. Through his fevered account, Dr. Henderson learned that the sisters had created an elaborate system of underground chambers carved into the hillside. Captives were kept in various restraints, with the sisters visiting occasionally to provide minimal food and water while explaining their divine purpose. Mercy spoke extensively about preserving pure mountain bloodlines, about being chosen instruments for a divine plan to produce a race untouched by modern civilization. She had devised breeding programs meant to create children who would inherit carefully selected traits of strength and intelligence. Morrison described being forced into circumstances he could barely articulate even in delirium, subjected to the sisters' twisted interpretations of sacred duty. His escape was born of opportunity and desperation. Temperance had been careless during a feeding, leaving wrist restraints slightly loose. Over several days, Morrison worked at the chains during long hours of darkness, eventually freeing one hand. He waited for the right moment, overpowered Temperance during her next visit, took her knife, and fled into the wilderness. His injuries came from the sisters' resistance and his panicked flight over miles of dangerous terrain, driven by terror of recapture. He crawled the final stretch to Harrison, nearly spent, driven only by the need to warn others of what lurked in that hollow. Samuel Morrison died on September 15th, 3 days after reaching Harrison. The infection in his wounds had progressed too far for the limited rural medical treatments to overcome. But in his final lucid hours, he provided Dr. Henderson and Deputy Thornton with enough details to guide an investigation: the hidden cellar entrance, the layout of the underground chambers, and the names of other men he had encountered, men whose families had filed missing persons reports, now sitting on Thornton's desk. Morrison's testimony gave Thornton the evidence he needed, but convincing authorities to authorize a raid proved far more difficult. County officials doubted the story of 2 isolated mountain women systematically capturing strong men. The scenario seemed implausible to those unfamiliar with the extreme isolation where the Caldwell sisters lived. Thornton spent 2 weeks navigating bureaucratic resistance, documenting Morrison's account and finally persuading state authorities that federal intervention was warranted. The remote location and seriousness of the allegations meant Newton County could not handle the raid alone. By early October 1899, Thornton had assembled 6 federal marshals willing to risk the dangerous expedition into the mountains. The raid began on October 8th before dawn, with Thornton's party departing Harrison. The journey required a full day of difficult travel. During the trek, Thornton briefed the marshals on Morrison's testimony, emphasizing caution. The sisters had maintained their operations for years, using isolation, careful selection of victims, and methods that allowed them to subdue men stronger than themselves. Late in the afternoon, the party reached the hollow. Thornton split his team to block potential escape routes, while he and 2 marshals approached the main cabin. Smoke rose from the chimney, the only sign of life. Thornton called out, demanding the sisters present themselves. Mercy emerged from a heavy wooden door in the rock face. What happened next was swift and shocking. Mercy froze momentarily, then drew a small vial from her dress. Before anyone could intervene, she drank it and collapsed. The marshals rushed forward, but she convulsed and died within minutes, the poison she had prepared for this situation taking effect. Temperance appeared from inside the cellar entrance, choosing resistance over death. She attacked the nearest marshal with a hunting knife, moving with the silent speed that had made her effective at hunting men and animals alike. A marshal fired in self-defense, striking her in the chest. She fell, dying before Dr. Henderson could attempt treatment. With both sisters dead, Thornton faced the grim task of searching the property described by Morrison. The cellar entrance led into a tunnel carved through solid rock, descending into the mountain. Torches revealed an underground complex larger than Morrison had described. Multiple chambers branched from the main tunnel, some with crude living spaces, straw mattresses and buckets, others with chains and restraints embedded into the stone. The air was thick with the smell of human waste, unwashed bodies, and decay, which the lawmen immediately recognized as signs of death and suffering. In the third chamber they found 3 living victims, not the adult men expected, but children approximately 3 to 7 years old, huddled together in the dark. The children displayed intense fear of the torchlight flickering across the rough-hewn walls as strangers entered their hidden prison, the children retreating to the farthest corners and making sounds barely recognizable as human speech. Dr. Henderson advanced slowly, speaking in gentle tones, gradually coaxing them into accepting his presence. Their physical state shocked even men accustomed to the harshness of mountain life. Severe malnutrition, untreated infections, and skin so pale it seemed almost translucent from years without sunlight. These children had been born into the cellar system, raised in complete darkness, knowing nothing of the world beyond their underground confinement. The deeper tunnels revealed the full extent of the horror the Caldwell sisters had created in the mountain hollow. Beyond the small living quarters where the 3 children had been discovered, the tunnels stretched into a series of burial chambers where the sisters had hidden their victims. Deputy Thornton's careful documentation recorded 28 bodies in varying states of decay, some reduced to skeletons, suggesting years of neglect, others showing signs of more recent death. The limited forensic capabilities of 1899 Arkansas prevented investigators from determining exact causes of death or precise timelines. Yet the evidence told a stark story of systematic captivity, abuse, and murder lasting at least 3 years. Among the remains, personal belongings allowed many victims to be identified, matched with missing person reports that had piled on Thornton's desk. William Hartman, a cautious Missouri trapper who vanished in November 1898, was recognized by a distinctive belt buckle described by his wife. Joseph Miller, a German immigrant whose size and strength apparently made him a target, was identified by the unusual blonde hair still clinging to his skull. The most damning evidence came from Mercy Caldwell herself. In the main cabin, investigators found a diary sewn into the lining of a quilt, its pages filled with Mercy's meticulous handwriting documenting every detail of the sisters' operation. She recorded each victim's capture with dates and descriptions, noting physical traits she considered desirable for her twisted breeding plans. The diary revealed her complete conviction that she and her sister were chosen by divine purpose, preserving pure mountain bloodlines from the contamination of modern life. Scripture, particularly passages from the Old Testament about fruitfulness and multiplication, was twisted into a justification for every atrocity she committed. The diary described forced attempts at reproduction with captive men, recording births and the frequent deaths of infants born in the cellar chambers. She showed no remorse, only frustration when her plans failed to achieve the results she believed God demanded. The surviving children presented challenges that 1899 medicine and social services were ill-equipped to handle. Dr. Henderson examined them thoroughly, documenting treatable physical ailments alongside psychological damage beyond repair. The children had never seen sunlight, never experienced normal human interaction outside the sisters' cruel manipulation, never learned to speak beyond primitive sounds. They displayed extreme fear of open spaces, cowering from the sky as if it might strike them. Arkansas authorities placed them in a state orphanage in Little Rock, where staff attempted to provide the specialized care these traumatized children needed. The oldest child, a girl of about 7, eventually learned limited speech and simple tasks, but never fully recovered from years in darkness. The younger two remained largely unresponsive to rehabilitation, development so stunted by early deprivation that adaptation to normal society proved impossible. All 3 died young, the oldest succumbing to pneumonia at 14, her body weakened by chronic malnutrition, her spirit apparently unable to fight for a life she had never been prepared to live. The community's response was swift and intense. Within days of the raid, local families gathered at the Caldwell homestead and burned every building to the ground.